So literature, this is my welding Bible. You guys keep hearing me preaching about you got to know the literature, you got to know the literature. You just can't learn enough literature. The literature is what makes you smart and gives you the tools to apply in the field to make you a good welder and pull stuff off. This is my welding Bible, man. UTP was real big in the 90s. They've kind of phased out some, but you can still get it, and I've tried all kinds of their stuff in here. We'll go through the book a little bit, but I got a couple people in particular that have commented they're pushing towards getting out on their own too, and appreciate all the input and stuff. So this is kind of directed at you guys more than anybody, but you got to know the literature, man. And I ran into a guy, well, one of my accounts there in the 90s, and they needed bunch of brass wear lugs welded onto a steel mast on a forklift, and with a bolt hole, it was a bolt through originally, and that was all jacked up and stripped out, and they were like, shit, you can't do that. And it was like, yeah, well, let's see if we can do that. Pulled out the welding Bible, flipped on through it, and this thing's pretty cool. Each section, you know, cast iron or whatever, it tells you exactly what you need to do. If you follow the steps provided in this book, it'll work every time. I've never had a problem with anything. UTP cold welding systems for cast. They're real good on, you know, preparing and what you got to do and pictures for how you want to be. But it was like, all right, so we need to weld brass or copper to steel. So I pulled out the Bible, started going through it. I put a couple things in here. Hot welding of cast iron. They got a lot of good cast stuff. UTP breaks new ground, motor blocks, cylinder heads, resurfacing of valve seats, bridge fractures, cracks, etc. But if we keep going here, I think I marked that in here somewhere. We're on into the cast stuff. Gets down into the aluminum rods, tells you all about the aluminum rods. The UTP 49 is the main aluminum rod that I used for aluminum, and it gives you all the specs. There's your elongation, there's your tensile, there's your hardness, tells you which polarity to run, how many amps you should basically be running. I thought unless I missed that, I thought I had just marked. Maybe it's the one after this one. I went through and kind of marked it. White metal rod, UTP 41, magnesium rod. They got stuff in here for the railroad, you know, that meets the specs for the stuff I've been welding on the railroad. Let's see here, where did we end up on that? There you go, UTP 39, pure copper welding electrode. In the construction industry, often used for joining copper to steel bars and electrically heated driveways to prevent ice from forming. So I ordered up some of this UTP 39, turned right around and welded them brass and copper wear plates straight onto the steel mast. Did that for probably 6 different forklifts, I bet, for them. Just stick welded the brass or the copper straight to the steel. Not one of them broke or anything, so elongation up to 50%. Holy cow, that's killer. 32 on your tensile strength. But it doesn't matter what you run into. If you have your little Bible, you can pull this out and look up anything that you need to do. I just keep one in the truck with me so that it, you know, there's the UTP rail weld. This is the hard rod that I used before I found metal powder rod. It's UTP 6700, and it's a double lay thing. You're supposed to put down the 6700, and then you're supposed to cap it with the UTP 7100. That's what I used on wood grinders for 20 years, was this UTP 6700, until I found the metal powder rod. If you go back through my videos, you'll have to go back about a year or so, but there's a video on metal powder rods, and that's just way better. One of the main reasons was the rod recovery rate on the 6700, and I put that in the video that I made a year ago, is only 130%. The rod recovery rate on the metal powder rod, 200%. So the last time I did the wood grinder with this here, it took 32 sticks of the UTP 6700, and that was 3/16 rod, pretty big rod. It took 32 sticks of this normal rod, and I did the exact same thing with 11 sticks of that metal powder rod. So like I said in that other video, that metal powder rod costs a little bit more, but it goes 2-3 times farther. So you're really saving money is what you're doing. But as long as you got your Bible, man, there ain't nothing you can't do in here. I mean, everything in here that you could possibly. Chamfer rod, that's some really good chamfer rod. They just had the UTP 82 when I was at the drilling company. They just came out with that UTP 82 AS. That is some awesome chamfer rod right there. Really good stuff. But everything's in the book. I mean, like I said, it tells you what polarity to run, what amperage is basically required for each rod. A lot of Unispray stuff that had just came out in the 90s. But I mean, each section has its own set of literature and stuff you're supposed to do and follow. I had a job I did in the 90s at that drilling company we were doing the Denver library, and they had busted the frame on a big loader. It was like a IT-28F or something, if I remember right. And here's another good thing about the book. It shows you how to identify different steels by the different sparks that come off. You can actually identify steel by the pattern that the sparks make when they're coming off. And that's how I used to do it until I learned that you can torch cast steel, but you can't torch cast iron. So that's the first thing I do if I'm not sure if it's cast iron or cast steel. I just pull out the torch, find a little corner or something where it ain't going to hurt it if I cut it off. And it just don't cut. It'll just kind of gum up and bubble up on you. But anyhow, that Denver library job, that IT-28 loader, the main frame on it was probably a 4x10, maybe a 4x12 rec tubing, and they had busted it all the way down the inside, all the way across the bottom, and all the way up the outside. The only thing that kept the frame attached was that top 4-inch lip of tubing. That's what kept the loader from literally falling in half. So I went in there, ground it all out. They called me down there. I went in there and ground it all out and threw some 70-18 on there, and all I could get was half of the back because there was stuff in the way. And then I got the bottom, and I got that outer side. And it held in there for a few days, but it cracked again. So then I went ahead and beveled everything out again and cleaned it all up, and I fried it with 110-18. It's almost twice as strong. But it didn't last any longer. It only lasted 3 or 4 days. And they didn't want to shut the loader down. I mean, it would have just screwed the whole job up. So they were barking at me, you better pull a rabbit out of your frickin' hat. So pulled out the Bible. It's like, well, 70-18's got 32.5% elongation and didn't stretch enough, and it still broke it. The 110-18's got 24% elongation, and it didn't hold in there any longer. So I'm thinking in my mind, it's like, well, the extra strength didn't do me any good. I got to find something that flexes more than that 24% that the 110-18 had. So I pulled out the Bible. UTP 63. All position electrode for joining of alloy steels. 630 is a high variant of the 63 electrode with a metal recovery or yield of 160%, so that's pretty good on the rod recovery rate. But I just started going through the specs, and this is what I found. Tensile strength, 100,000. Well, that's just as strong as the 110-18. Look at the elongation. Elongation on 110-18 was only 24%. Elongation on this specialty rod is 40%, but it still has the tensile strength of the 110-18. So the third time I welded this frame up on this IT, I did the same thing, cleaned it all up, beveled it all out, and went ahead and picked up some of this UTP 63. Same thing, I could only get half of the backside, got all the bottom, got all the outside all the way to the top. They drove it for like 4 more months. It never busted again. So that extra elongation is what made the difference. It held in there with this tensile strength, but the elongation is what made the difference. It let it flex more without tearing or separating. But if I wouldn't have been big on literature like I'm always preaching to everybody, I wouldn't have known that. I wouldn't have, if I didn't have my Welding Bible, I wouldn't have known that. I wouldn't have known you could weld brass or copper to steel if I wouldn't have had my Bible. I wouldn't have been able to figure this stuff out here if I wouldn't have had my Bible. And that's what I did. I went back to the shop, pulled out my Bible, just started digging. It took me a while, but that's where I ended up. And literally, it only lasted 3 or 4 days with the 70-18 and the 110-18. I cleaned it all up and fried it all up again with this 40% elongation, and it went months. It finished the job out. It was 3, 4, might even have been 5 months. It was a big-ass job, man. It was literally the new Denver library in the 90s. So, but just wanted to pass it on for all you guys that are trying to suck up stuff and get out on your own. You need a Bible, man. I don't know who they're pushing these days in 2020, but you can still get UTP. Everything I've tried in this book worked perfect. I didn't have one problem through decades of anything with this UTP products. It's maybe a little pricier than some of the other stuff, but you get what you pay for. I mean, and then just follow what they tell you to do. I mean, it gets down into the beginning of it here. UTP 62, I used that a lot too. It was 100,000 tensils. Tensile strength, 33% elongation. I used to keep that on hand in case I ran out of stuff, but 633 kbs, that sounds familiar. What was this stuff? Highly stressed joints on steels up to 80,000 tensile. Low and medium carbon steels, low alloys, cast, Malabar iron to steel. So you could weld cast iron to regular steel with this 613. That's why that 613 looks familiar. I think that is what I was getting in 564, which was just like pencil lead. Maybe it's the 612. This is it. This is what I used to repair all the fuel tanks. I'd repair the diesel tanks while the rig was sitting there running. I'd take a big exhaust hose and I'd just put it over their exhaust and plumb it on into the fuel tank, and this stuff here works sweet. I'd get it in 564, which is literally like the size of a pencil lead. And it is the smoothest downhill running stuff, man. Especially, yeah, it says right in there, especially for vertical down position where the slag has a tendency to run ahead. So it's kind of like a 60-13. It's not a deep penetrating rod, but I repaired countless numbers of fuel tanks with that UTP 612. Awesome stuff. There's all your specs on it, your tensile, your elongation, and how to run it, the different sizes, and that's what I was getting, that 564 right there. So, but I just wanted to pass some of that on, pass on the quick library story. We were screwed on that job until I found that UTP 63 with the 40% elongation. I was even impressed with that it went months and didn't re-crack or re-break. Good stuff. So just a quick other tip for those of you that are serious about getting into it, man. You need a Bible. You need a go-to for your literature. Back in the 90s, people used to laugh at me. They were like, "You're the only guy I know of that read that damn book from the front to the back." I needed the info, man. I literally had other shops that would just call me on the spur of the moment. "Hey, man, I know you read that whole frickin' book. We got to do this and we need that. And what would you recommend? Do this, do this and get some of that and you should be good." Right on, thanks, man. So, but anyhow, I know you can still get UTP. I don't know who's big these days on it. If I'm in a bind and need something specialty-wise, I'll still order up the UTP. I used it for decades. I know it works real well. So, anyhow, Weldors Bible, a lot of good information in it. Everybody be safe.